Hi guys, welcome to Snetterton. So let's see. Before I start this deep dive, I want you to take this deep dive with a fairly significant grain of salt. I mean, obviously, anytime you listen to someone else give their views on a track and any sort of track guide or whatever, um, you have to be a little cautious about it because driving styles differ and conditions differ, cars differ, and all of that. But Snetterton especially because it is a perfect example of how your knowledge of a track changes over time. That goes for all tracks, in my opinion. I think every time you go back to a track and prepare for it, for a race on it, I think you find new things, you learn new things, and how you drive it will change in subtle ways. How you set up the car will change in subtle ways. So I think that goes for every track, but for Snetterton specifically, it's still a very new track to me. I just don't have a lot of time on it, which means that 6 months from now, if I've raced it 2 or 3 more times after this coming weekend, my knowledge of the track and my view of the track is going to evolve, and I think that should probably happen to everyone every time they come back to a track and do legitimate preparation on it. So that's why I say take this with a grain of salt, because as far as I'm concerned, I'm still fairly new in my evolution on this track. I think I've learned a lot in the last couple of days, and hopefully something I can point out will be useful to you. But there you go. That's my 2 cents on the track. I'm not a big fan of this track. I don't particularly care for the flow of it very much. But having said that, I don't think it's a bad track necessarily. It's just not one that I enjoy driving all that much, or at least not as much as I do other tracks. I don't think it's a great track for the Lambo. I think it's okay, but there are certainly places on the track that expose some of the Lamborghini's weaknesses. So I don't think it's a great track for it. But fortunately, at least for now, we were thinking we were going to have rain this weekend, but the updated forecast shows that it's dry. So at least for the moment, I don't have to worry about driving the Lamborghini on Snetterton in the rain, which I think would have been a double whammy. But having said that, let's get to the deep dive, huh? Okay, so approaching T1, it's your fastest turn on the track, and you have the 3, 2, and 1 marker boards. My braking reference is the number 1 marking board, and I'm going to get on the brakes pretty hard just as I go past the number 1 board. And you can see the curb on the right-hand side. You can take a pretty good chunk of that curb without having too much trouble. And I think as soon as you do, you want to let the car drift out into the track a little bit. And then as soon as you get clear of that, probably about midway between the first apex and the second apex is where you'll see me get back on full throttle. You may be able to go a little bit sooner depending on how the end of this curb on the right hand side, on how dangerous it is to the car that you drive. It's deadly to the Lambo, so I can't touch it. I'm sure any of you who've been on the track at this point knows that there is a significant bump right at the end of the red and white stripe curbing on the right hand side. If I catch that in the Lamborghini, then it's going to bounce me around badly and probably put me off on the left side of the track. So all I'm really looking to do on the second apex, because this is a double apex corner, is to just brush essentially the edge of the curbing or the white boundary line. That's really all I'm looking to do. So I have to time when I go back on the accelerator to both clear the end of that curb and to make sure that once I go full throttle, that I am not going to put myself off on the left-hand side. That'll be a frequent mistake this weekend when we go to race here. Is that people will get too aggressive on the throttle and put themselves over on the other side of this exit curb on the left-hand side. Those are probably the two biggest dangers on this corner are the bump at the end of the curb on the right-hand side on exit, and then overdoing it on the throttle and pushing too far into the grass on the left-hand side. Both of which are going to give your lap a very difficult time. But as long as you can avoid those two things, then you should be pretty good. It's not that tough of a corner, all things being equal. Now, as for turn 2, the first hairpin, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, not a ton to it. Both this corner and the other hairpin on the track are pretty straightforward examples of hairpins. And on both of them, I'm just going to look to stay out wide for as long as I can, turn in late, try and catch a late apex, and get back on the throttle as quickly as I can. My braking marker is the orange mark on the right hand side. Just as I'm getting alongside of it or just going past it is when I'm going to get on the brakes. And give me 1 second. I'm going to pull up the track map. Montreal, yeah, I knew they're good, decent names for all of these corners, so I should memorize them, but I don't have them memorized yet. So onto the brakes as soon as I get alongside the orange marker, hold it out wide, trail brake into it, and try to catch a late apex. I think with this corner and the other hairpin, the mistakes I find myself commonly making is just pushing too hard on the brake marker and overshooting the corner a little bit. That's not a death knell, I think, for either of these hairpins. But I think in a perfect world, I'd be catching the apex late and right on the red and white striped curbing. Obviously, you see the sausage curb on the right-hand side there. You want to avoid that, but just by way of example, you can see how far off I am. It's just, that tends to be the mistake that I make here is just to brake just a meter or so too late and miss my apex, entirely. So I'd much rather be a full, car width inside of where I am. But having said that, I don't think it is a killer on this curb. It doesn't seem to hurt my lap time a ton when I miss it a little bit like this. But as quick as you can, obviously get it turned around. I don't know what kind of experience you're all having on this track. In the Lamborghini, rear end limitation seems to be the biggest problem on most of these slower corners where I'm really struggling for grip on the exits. I've done everything I can, I think, from a setup standpoint to mitigate that as much as I can, but the back end really likes to start stepping out and moving around on me on the exits. So throttle discipline, I think, is critical on these so that you don't spend any more time spinning your wheels than you have to. And then on the exit, I think in a perfect world, you'd probably be exiting out on the red and white striped curbing. I come up short of it here, but I know I don't want to be outside on the grading, and that's a pretty common refrain here in the Lamborghini. Some of your cars may handle those grates a lot better than mine does, and you may be okay out there. And if you are, then be more aggressive on the throttle, and use that use that space that's available to you. But as usual, the Lamborghini doesn't care for it much. So so yeah, I don't want to be any further out than the red and white striped curbing, and even then, that's as far as I would want to be, just because of the added slippiness of getting out there on the curb when I'm still under heavy, acceleration in first gear. The torque just kicks in, and I can start spinning my wheels even more. So I'd much rather just get the car straightened out, keep it on the black, or maybe just the very edge of the red and white striped curbing for me personally at this point. Palmer, I think, is a really interesting corner, and I mean, I suppose it's pretty straightforward, but it's a tricky one, I think. It's pretty narrow, You don't have a large window to work with in here, so I think this corner requires a lot of precision. So, like for instance, when I said on Montreal on the last corner, where you can miss your apex a little bit, and you're still pretty much okay. That's not really the case with Palmer. You've got to be pretty precise and know exactly what it is that you're trying to accomplish here. If you see the light stand on the left-hand side of the track, that's what I use as my brake marker. And just as I go past it is when I apply the brakes. I try not to be too harsh on the brakes because you have to start turning immediately, and I think that it's easy to use too much brake into this corner and unsettle the back end as a result. So um, I think that I think the first mistake that's easy to make here is just braking too early for it, and not realizing that you can carry a lot more speed into this corner than I think feels natural, right? So I think the first mistake is a tendency just to brake too early, but if you brake as late as you can, then it's also easy to brake too hard and get into the problem I was just talking about unsettling the back end as you turn into the corner. So be on guard about that. So when it passes me on the left-hand side, I'm braking and turning at the same time. As you can see, it's not a full application of the brake. I think probably the biggest mistake that most folks will make here, and I know that it bothered me for the first day or so when I was working on this track, is the tendency to turn in too early. So let's go to the overhead. You really want a mid to late apex on this corner. The problem is when you turn in, you can't see where that apex is. So you see me really catch it, right around here somewhere, and that's good. That's where I want to be. The problem is that from the driver's seat, that's really hard to see. So if you are struggling in this on the entry to this corner, it is probably because you are turning in too early, I think. And you are going to have to train yourself to either delay your turn in or use a smaller steering angle when you do your initial turn in. Okay, so you see I turn in, but then I kind of hold it and I'm working over fairly gradually. That is because I am trying to delay the apex until I get to the middle of the corner. Okay. So if you find yourself putting a wheel in the dirt right around here at some point, that's where you need to back up and take a look at your entry and either practice delaying your turn in or lessening the amount of steering angle that you're initially using. because once you get to about this point where the end of the curb, comes into sight, that's where you should be able to straighten up the wheel and go full throttle. If you've hit that apex properly mid corner, then I think you won't have any problem doing that like I'm able to do here. But if you're catching the apex too early, you're going to have to be coming on and off the throttle and delaying, and that's going to cost you time. Because once you go back on full throttle, you want to go and you don't want to have to let up. So make sure that you get an apex where you can do that is later in the corner. This this grading is not nearly as bad as a lot of the other ones on the track. Even the Lambo can handle it fairly well. So I think most of you will be able to run out here and use every bit of this on your exit. Agostini is the second hairpin that's coming up. Once again, you have the brake markers on the right-hand side, the 3, the 2, and the 1 board. Hopefully, no one is going to plow those down during the middle of the race because it gets really tough finding brake markers after that. If it happens, I'm going to be using the white buildings on the right-hand side, as a reference, but they're not nearly as good. They're about the only thing you have as far as a backup, but they don't work as well. So your braking point is going to be somewhere between the number 2 and the number 1 board. Mine is pretty close to the number 1 board, but at least halfway, I would say, between them. Right there is where I start going on the brakes. And I think that's pretty consistent for most everyone that I have seen is right kind of in the middle of the 2 and the 1 board. And I will hold it out here to the right hand side just like a typical hairpin. Do a late entry and a late apex. This apex you can do as a tight kind of double apex. Once again, I don't think it costs you much in the way of time if you go that route. But as usual, I prefer a late apex myself, so that's what I take here. And then again, throttle discipline, because the back end likes to move around on me quite a bit as I go full throttle coming out of here. In fact, when we watch this lap at full speed, I think you'll see quite a few more sort of micro corrections than a lot of the deep dives that I do, and that's just because how slippy the back end of the Lamborghini is on this track, certainly through sectors 1 and 2 and probably elsewhere. This grading on the right hand side gives me a lot more trouble than the last corner, so I try not to get out onto it, just getting out onto the Yeah, getting out right on the edge or onto the red and white striping is perfectly fine for me. I don't really want to be much further out than that. Otherwise, I start running into traction problems again with the Lambo. Okay, Hamilton. This is I think a lot of your exactly where you do what you choose to do is going to depend on how well your car can handle the exit curb and grading when you're coming out of Hamilton. The Lamborghini can't handle it at all, so if I get out on them, then certainly out onto the grading, then that's a mistake on my part. You can see that just as I'm approaching the Marshall stand on the right hand side, it is that's where I use my braking point. There's an excellent chance you'll be able to brake a little bit later than me here because I have to guard against that the right side of the track on my exit. So I have to make sure that I've slowed the car enough to be able to hit the apex here and get back on the gas without running off. So if you were able to push that farther because your car can handle that better, then by all means go for it. But for me, the priority is to hit this apex, and I am trying to hit it essentially right where the barrel is, and I will keep it in third gear here. This is a fairly blind and difficult corner to read. So if you are still uncomfortable with it, then by all means drop down to second here and give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. But I think ultimately you're going to want to stay in the higher gear so that you don't scrub too much speed. That's where the quicker lap times are going to come from. And then as we get up to the exit, I can't get back onto the throttle until I am certain that the attitude of the car is good enough to keep me off of the right side here far enough. Let's see how far. Yeah, that's good. I wouldn't want to be any further to the right here than I am right now. I get out to the onto the grading, and the car is going to bottom out on the edge of the red and white striped curbing. So that's why my braking point, my line, and my acceleration point are all where they are because I have to avoid getting too far out here. I think that let's see. Other thing I want you to look at is the amount of brake pressure that I'm using. It's not much. I'm really just trying to slow the car slightly and get the nose turned in. It's really more of a dab on the brakes than it is a significant brake in my mind. So just enough to get the car turned in, get the left wheels over onto the curb right there next to the barrels, and then wait for the car to hook up and make sure that I'm clear on the right side on the exit, and I'm good to go at that point. Augies, this is a corner that the Lamborghini hates. It really just kind of sucks through here. It's all I can do to keep the back end underneath me. I'll I'll brake just as I get alongside of the turn signs, hold it out to the left. I will keep it in second gear here and try to get off of the brakes relatively early so that I can get some weight back on the rear tires for grip, and just roll it right over the red and white striped curbing. You obviously can cut this quite a bit, but if you're going to run into a drive-through for track limit violations, this is probably where it's going to start because it's easy to cut this too much and get track limits warning as a result. So watch yourself there. Obviously, we just came off of Hungaroring, where track limits are also an issue. For the most part, they're not on this track, but this corner in particular will bite you throughout the race if you don't know how to manage the angle of your car over this curb. I think generally speaking, as long as you keep your left side tires outside of the white border line, then you're going to be safe. So if I were you, that's how I would practice it. I would practice with the idea in mind that anytime I get the left tires onto the white line, that's a mistake in my mind, because now you're close enough that there's a good chance it's going to bite you in the ass come race day. So to prevent that being an issue, I practice with trying to keep the left tires outside of the white track borderline. If I do that consistently, I know I won't make enough errors throughout the race to risk a drive-through. This exit, particularly in the Lambo, I don't know if all of your cars are as bad as, but it's just horrible for the Lamborghini. This is where the back end wants to step around on me all over the place, and it feels like it takes forever for it to plant itself where I can legitimately get back on the gas. Feels like I'm constantly making little corrections with both the steering and the throttle to manage the grip on the back end as I'm coming out of here. So the best I can tell you is, be patient. You're going to have to know your car and know what it can do and when it can do it on that exit to be able to, do consistent lap times, right? Because if you get too happy on the throttle on that exit and your car doesn't like it, just like the Lamborghini doesn't, then you're going to wind up wasting a lot of time throughout the course of a race. It won't necessarily hurt you on one lap, but if you're doing it every third time through there, then your lap times are going to suffer. So if you're experiencing that, be mindful of it and understand that you need to adjust your steering inputs and your throttle inputs so that you're not spinning the wheels any more than you absolutely have to. And then the yet another corner where the where grip is an issue for me is Williams. I played with this over the last couple of days quite a bit in both second and third gear, and ultimately I think second gear is the better option. Maybe in a car that's geared completely differently, like the Porsche or something along those lines. Third gear might still be a perfectly viable solution, but my instinct tells me that in most cars, second gear is going to be the correct choice. So once I'm approaching it, I'm going to get myself out onto the to the green part of the track on the left-hand side, and my braking point is the very end of it. I think the entry here is probably the critical point of this corner and the part that is most easy to screw up. And let's do an overhead view first so that I can explain that. So keep in mind that that this is really other than the front straight, this is really the only straight that you're going to have is on the back straight on the when you come out of the exit here. So you absolutely must have a good exit. And the reason that you're going to screw up the exit is because you're going to screw up the entry. And if you look at the shape of this corner, notice how the corner tightens towards the end of it, right? So essentially, your available track gets smaller as you come up to the exit. So it's extremely easy to apex this corner too early, find the corner tightening on you even further as you get deeper into it, and put yourself into a position where any number of things are going to happen. One, you're going to have to back out of it, right? Two, you're going to lose traction because you're going to be up on the curb and possibly even into the grass, right? So your car is going to be unsettled, and you're going to have to back off of the throttle just to keep from spinning it. But at the very least, you're going to have to delay your throttle input, because if you don't, that is when you're going to exit too wide and put the car into the grass on the left side somewhere around here, because you just didn't have the line right from the beginning. So if you find yourself really struggling with the exit here, and continuously getting into the grass on the left-hand side, I'm fairly confident it's because you're not doing the entry properly. So let's take a look at the entry. What I'm going to suggest to you is that this is one where you definitely need to not delay your turn in, but delay the amount of steering input you use in the early phase of your turn in, right? And that's going to take some practice, because if you were turning in too early and catching the curb too early, it's because you have too much steering input too early, right? That does not mean that you're turning in too early. In other words, you would still start the turning phase of the corner at essentially the same time. But what you have to do is you have to turn less than what you're doing now initially when you're making your entry. So when I get up here, I'll put my left wheels out on the grass, just a dab of the brakes, not very much at all, and then holding the steering right for a minute until the car starts getting substantially into the corner before I really start turning it over. That will let me catch the apex right around here in the center to late. And once I do that, now I'm in a position where when I straighten up the wheel, I can go full throttle without putting it over the left side curb on the exit. And once again, this is another corner where I really have to be patient on the throttle, because the grip just doesn't seem to be there in the Lambo, and it really likes to slide around quite a bit. Both sectors 1 and sector 2 have a lot of what I consider low grip areas in the Lamborghini, where the back end likes to move around quite a bit. If you're finding that's the case, there are a couple of things that I'd recommend looking at from a setup standpoint. I essentially did all of them to try and improve the mechanical grip on the Lamborghini. Doesn't necessarily mean you will need to, but any of them might be able to help you. So what did I do? I went awfully soft on the rear end. So both the wheel rate, I think I dropped it all the way down to its lowest setting. I dropped the ARB a couple of clicks. Let me think. I put less rear toe on it, so that the tires, I'm able to have more grip available on the exit itself. Let's see. I lowered the differential down to, I think I've got it somewhere around 30, 40, or 50. I don't recall exactly where, but a fairly low setting to try to reduce the amount of spin that I get on my power exits. If you're running a lot of rake, you can drop the rear end. That will move more of the weight back onto the back tires and should improve the grip that way. For me in the Lamborghini, I didn't do that, at least not at this track, because I don't know why. I hope you can hear me, but I think my mic just cut out. For some reason, maybe the battery died, didn't it? I don't know. So give me a sec. I'm going to plug it in. Radio check, radio check. Radio check, radio check. Okay. I don't know why it cut out, but I'm plugged in, hardwired now, so that shouldn't be a problem again. Let's see. What was I saying? Yeah, um, about the rake. It's not something I like to do in the Lambo when I can help it, just because it tends to make it a little bit understeery for my taste. So I will focus on adding mechanical grip instead as much as I can wherever I can, so that I can keep the overall balance of the car more on the nose and make it more nimble. But if rear end grip is something that you are struggling for as well, and the next corner is a good example of where that can happen, then then lower the rake in your car, and that should help you stabilize the car quite a bit, and not have the back end run around on you so much. Okay, now we get to the first of the two beasts on this track, and they are a pain in the ass. There's no question about it. Brundle and Nelson. Okay, as we come up here, let me tell you what I did. I did a whole bunch of research over the last couple of days to really get a feel for how pro drivers manage um, this coming corner and Murray's the last corner, because in a way they're very similar in how you approach them. And I looked at both sim racers and real world drivers. Obviously, it's real world drivers is a lot harder to get telemetry on, to get replays of their laps with telemetry to see exactly what it is they're doing. But I was able to find enough that I think I have a pretty good idea of exactly of what's going on and what they're doing. And what I'm going to tell you is not easy. I mean, it really isn't. These two corners are going to test your skill on the brakes to the maximum limit. They really are, and you may not be able to do it. It depends on how much time you have and how much work you can put into it, and whether that's worth it to you. But first I'm going to tell you, I think what most people do on this that is, I'm going to use the word incorrect, but I don't know if that's a fair word to use, um, because we're mortal, to be perfectly honest with you. So what you're going to try to do, if you are newer to this track or newer to sim racing, and your braking skill is not quite developed yet, you're going to try to go hard onto the brakes right here. You're going to let off of them, coast through the apex, and then go back hard on the brakes again. Okay, right around here somewhere. In other words, you're going to break this corner up into two discrete braking zones, right? One before the apex, starting right around the bridge, and then one after the apex as you go to enter the right-hander. Now, here's the problem that creates. Okay, and you are going to really struggle with the balance of the car. Okay, because think about what happens when you do that in two discrete braking phases. As you pass underneath the bridge and go hard on the brakes, all of the weight shifts to the nose, right? Then you let off and you go to coast probably through the apex itself. Um, the weight shifts back onto the rear end as you're coming through the apex, right? The weight is shifting back. That's taking weight off of the nose, right? What that means is it's going to be much, much harder for you to get over to the left side of the track where you see me right now, because you won't have as much weight on the nose itself, which means you're going to have more understeer. Okay? So what are you going to do? You're going to turn the wheel even more to fight the understeer that you're going to experience because you don't have enough weight on the front end of the car, right? And what that means is that when you get to this point and you enter your second braking phase, you're now going to force the car to shift all of the weight back onto the nose while you still have a significant amount of steering input into the car. What's going to happen? You're going to totally unbalance the car in this second braking phase. And there's an excellent chance that the back end is going to slide around all over the place underneath you, right? It's also going to make it harder to slow the car, because I think the tendency, and I know this because I was doing it as well, the tendency is that you will not brake enough, you will not slow the car enough by the time you get to the second braking phase in order to do a controlled braking maneuver in the second phase. You're going to be putting more braking demand on the car that it can reliably handle. So you're going to miss the apex a lot on the right-hander. Okay? Now my guess is that that description I just gave you is going to sound familiar to a lot of people, right? If you find yourself forced to continue with that approach, here's my suggestion to you, because you may not have any choice. If you can't adopt some version of what I'm going to show you here in just a second, then you're going to have to stick with your current approach of 2 discrete braking phases. Okay? But if you do, you have to find a way to do that without upsetting the car too much. Okay? So, you're going to have to give up something, in my opinion, in order to do that. So right now, for instance, my brake marker is the 1 board. Essentially, right when I'm getting on to that is when I'm going on the brakes. And there's at least a decent chance that that you're probably using that as well. Okay, but if you've watched track guides or anyone else and they're using something around that brake marker, the only reason they're able to brake that late is because they are able to brake properly through this next part of the corner. Okay, if you can't brake properly, you can't brake in the same place. You have to back up. And if you reach a point by this weekend and you still feel like you have to break this up into discrete braking phases, then I think you absolutely have to back up your brake marker and not push it as deep as what you're going to see me do or other drivers, because you have to be able to avoid unbalancing the car. So what I'm going to suggest is, where you'll see me braking right around the 1 board, I want you to back up a good, 15 feet or so, because what you're going to have to do is you are going to have to slow the car more by right around this point somewhere. You're going to have to slow the car more than I will, because you're going to have to come off of the brakes entirely somewhere around here, right? I can't tell you exactly where that is because that'll depend a lot on you. But you're going to be off the brakes at this point and coasting, which means you are no longer slowing the car other than just through the normal, coasting. The fact that you don't have any gas going on into the engine at the moment, right? So you're going to be slowing through coasting, but you're not slowing through braking, which means you are going to carry more of your speed through the apex than I will, because I am going to continue to brake through this portion of the corner. If you can't, that means you have to bleed off more speed than I do before you reach this point. Because if you don't, you're going to be carrying too much speed when you finish the coasting phase and go back onto the brakes right here. That is where you're going to unbalance the car and miss the apex. So, if you feel like you have to do two discrete braking zones, then back up your brake marker to, I would suggest, well before the number 1 board. Do a significant amount of your braking before you lift off of the gas and begin to coast through the apex. That should put you in still a good enough position to get back on the brakes and make a good entry into the right-hander. Okay, that's my best suggestion I have for you if you're unable to make an adjustment to your style by this weekend. Having said that, here is a closer example of what I have seen all of the pros do. And when I said take this whole thing with a grain of salt, this is a really good time to do it, because I'm nowhere near what I would consider proficient at it. I think I have the basic idea down on it, and I think enough to get it across to you. But the actual implementation of it is extremely difficult and is going to take you a lot of practice. It's going to take me a lot more practice before I really feel like I have it down. But there's enough to give you an idea. Okay, so what's the right way to do this? The right way to do this is to trail brake all the way through here. And that's why it's so hard, because you are going to have to combine your feeling of the brakes, the steering input, the speed of the car, and the grip of the tires all at the same time. This is an exceptionally highly skilled maneuver we're talking about, and it's not something you're going to pull off the first time. Okay? You're going to, so right around the 1 marker, right? I go into my initial braking, turn the car into the middle of the track to get it slowed, then I start coming off. But I never release the brakes. Okay, I will always maintain, 5-10%, somewhere along those lines, in order to keep a little bit of the weight onto the nose and to continue to slow the car at this point, right? Because I don't want to be going balls to the wall when I straighten up the car and get back on the brakes. I want the car completely under control when I go into the second phase of the braking. So the brake pressure never relieves entirely. It stays on there until I get to the second phase. That allows me to be all the way to the left side here with a relatively straight car that I can now go back on hard on the brakes. That puts me in an excellent position to attack the right-hander. Okay? Hey, Cope, how you doing, man? Let's see. How do I want to? I want to look at that from. I'm going to let it run all the way through so that you can watch the brake trace in its entirety. It's you know what? It's tough, Coped. I mean, it really, really is. And I honestly don't know. I don't know how you would be able to do this on a controller. I really don't. I've never tried it, but I can't imagine that it is easy because it requires so much nuance to do it the way the pros do it. I just don't know how you could ever do it on a controller. One thing I want you to notice too, I'm going to back it up and do that one more time. Yeah. I think I will. I'm going to back it up and do that one more time. The other thing I want you to notice is how there is a gradualness to my initial application. of the brakes when I get to the number 1 board, because I'm going into a steering input at the same time that I'm going on those brakes. I can't let the back end get out from under me. So I am minimizing the abruptness of the weight shift onto the front. So it's a much more gradual input in the initial part of the braking phase. And then as I start to get up here, that's when you'll see me start to release it gradually again. Then hold just a little bit of pressure to continue to slow the car and get the nose pointed where I want it to. And then once I have, then I can go back hard on the brakes. And now it's just a standard right-hander, more or less. And if you do that right, you can get back on the throttle pretty early. How early, depending on your car. As usual, this is another curb that the Lambo can't deal with, so I'm trying to keep it no more than just to, running up on the edge of the red and white. But I don't want to be very far over, so I have to watch my throttle input there. Okay, so that's the explanation. Let's take a look at it at full speed, just so you can give that a look. Yeah, it really is, Coped. It's just a hard damn corner complex. It really is. Okay, so, watch the brake trace. There's nothing easy about that. Nothing. It's literally just going to take you lap after lap after lap of practicing it. If you want to see me actually working on it and developing it, it's what I did mostly last night on my stream. I think it's the Snetterton Prep Part 2, and you can see me working on that where as I developed it, I would start braking. I think I started braking somewhere around the 2 board, just to make sure that I had the car slowed enough that I could control it and play with the brake pressure. And then just gradually, as I got more confident in my ability to understand how much brake pressure to use and when, then I would gradually start moving my braking point further and further forward. But that practice session will absolutely show you me struggling to understand how the braking works in this corner complex. So if you need an example of it, that's where you're going to find it. The 1 board is what I use. Okay. Okay, that's the first pain in the ass corner. The bomb hole it's not overly difficult so much as the timing of it is difficult, just because it's completely blind. Let's go up here to the apex. Okay. So the whole key to this corner is that the inside half of the track has a ton of camber to it. If you get beyond the inside part of the track flattens out and you lose all of the advantage of the camber of the corner. Okay, so it's absolutely critical that you practice hitting this apex on the red and white stripe paint. Normally, that would not be hard to do at all. The only reason it's difficult here is because it's blind and you pick it up so late, right? But you absolutely must hit that. hit that apex. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to take advantage of the camber. So here's what I use to help myself. And maybe it will help you as well. Let me go to my view. So what I cue off of is the Pirelli signs on the right-hand side. I'll use those as my turn-in point, right? Actually, I'm going to use the wheel. Essentially, as they come up into the right side of my windscreen, then that is essentially where I know I want to start my turn in. I won't get it perfect all the time, and I'm still not totally comfortable with it. But as you can see, as the first Pirelli sign starts getting right up into the right corner of my screen, that is where I start turning in. Right now, I also start releasing some of the throttle, which is too early. I know by watching other people who are better at this track than I am that I am coming off of the throttle too early, and it really should just be a very small lift of the throttle or a dab of the brakes, much closer to the apex than I am right now. But I do not have the steering point and the steering angle completely down yet, which means I have to give myself just a little bit of leeway. So I'll start my my throttle off just a little bit early to give myself time to pick up the apex and make sure I've caught it. Okay. Eventually, once I get comfortable enough with this track, then I should be able to pick up some time at this corner because I'll be able to carry more speed through more of the corner. But for right now, my priority is to hit this apex so that I can go back on the throttle as quickly as possible, right? And the only way I can do that reliably right now is to slow the car a little bit more than I would like to, a little bit earlier than I would like to. The other big part of this, though, is that at least in the Lambo, I simply cannot go beyond the red and white striped curbing here. The car will absolutely bottom out if I touch the grating. So this is my maximum point that I can hit on the exit. You may drive a car that gives you a little bit more leeway than that, and if so, that's fantastic. But for me, if I touch that grating, you can kiss a half a second of my lap time goodbye. So not a particularly difficult corner, but just the trickiness of not being able to spot the apex very far in advance. Okay, and now we get to the other tricky corner. Quorum obviously is not overly difficult. You know, it's really just a question of throttle discipline, trying to maintain as much speed as you can without instigating too much understeer and pushing yourself out too wide on the track. You know, so this is really just all about throttle discipline as you're coming through the meat of Quorum before you get up to Murray's. And obviously, the last part of the corner, which begins your entry into Murray's, is the very critical part of what we're going to be talking about here. And the reason it's difficult is that it's another area where you're going to have to blend your braking, your steering input, your grip, your line. You know, all of that has to be blended very well in order to maximize what you can do in this corner. And I would say that if it is one that you are struggling with, your best option for consistency, at least, is to flat out start slowing the car earlier. You know, drop it down to third and let off of the gas entirely and start coasting. You know, somewhere just probably past the end of the red and white striped curbing, somewhere around here, If you're really struggling with this corner and the car is getting unbalanced, I really think that's your only solution is to slow the car enough that you're going to be able to handle the weight shifts that are about to happen, right? So if that's the case, then I'm guessing you should be off the gas by here and just coasting and letting the car slow naturally a little bit before you get to a point where you have to get on the brakes. Okay. So I'm going to show you how I think it needs to be done. But if it's not something that you're able to accomplish by this weekend and do it confidently, then I think your only solution is just to start coasting earlier. Let that bleed off some of the speed so that you're not as dependent on slowing the car hard on the brakes while the car is unbalanced. Okay. But having said that, let's talk about how I think it needs to be done. And once again, I'm taking this from the pros and watching them and really see how they handle it. It's once again, it is trail braking and essentially trail braking in reverse. So the vast majority of the time, we use the term trail braking to refer to coming off of the brakes slowly and late in the corner in order to improve the braking distance and to affect the balance of the car. Okay, but trail braking can actually happen earlier than that as well, and this is a good example of it. So was the last difficult section, where you saw me holding the brake through the apex. That was essentially trail braking at the beginning of the right-hander, before I went full on the brakes. This is essentially the same thing, where as I get up to the end of the red and white curbing, I want to let the car drift out just a little bit. I don't want to be right up on the white line because I want a better angle to come in. So I'm going to let the car drift out just a little bit, and then I'll drop down to third in order to let the engine braking start slowing the car. And then what I use as a reference is right there. As soon as I get around the corner and I see the apex of the left-hander come into my view, that's where I know I want to start trail braking. Okay? I don't want to go hard and heavy on the brakes all at one time. I want the braking phase to be much more gradual. That means I need to start braking early. But you cannot start braking early and brake hard. Otherwise, the weight of the car is going to be completely unbalanced at a point when my steering is all the way over to the right. The back end is going to come straight up off of the tarmac and is going to very much want to start leading the race, right? So whatever braking I do initially cannot be hard. It has to be gradual. That is why I start trail braking now. So the application right here is going to be very soft and gentle and gradually getting harder the closer I get to straightening out the car. And because the weight has been transferred up onto the nose much more substantially, that allows me to get the car turned so that I'm all the way over to the right side of the track when I enter the hard portion of the braking, right? And now you're in a perfect position to enter the left-hander with as much speed as possible. If you wait too long to start your braking because you're worried about the car being unbalanced, right? Then you're going to be carrying too much speed at that point, and you're going to blow right past this apex, and you're going to lose a ton of time as a result. That is why this approach that I'm showing you is what I consider the optimal approach to take. It is, however, the most difficult approach to take as well. So watch that again and just watch the brake trace, the combination, with the steering, all of that. It's another one that you're simply going to have to practice over and over and over to get the proper feel of the balance of the car in relation to where you're steering and how you're braking. Yeah, it does, Cope. I mean, that's the reality. When you get it right, it's worth a ton of time, compared to everyone else. Okay, let's watch it at full speed so that you can see how that all looks in combination. Right? Um, this was a 147.2, which I think is a pretty solid lap. It is for me at least. I think that I think I'll eventually get it down to into the 46s. There's still a lot of time there to be had if I can get competent enough at what I'm trying to do by then. But I think a 147.2 is pretty solid at this point. So let's see. Let's watch a full lap from the cockpit cam first. And we'll do the helo view as well. As I said before, a little wide there at that apex, but not the end of the world. And there you have it. So hey, if you're working on those difficult braking maneuvers through Brundle and Murray's, and you're really struggling with them, and you need some help, give me a shout. They're hard, they really are. So if you need a second set of eyes on what you're doing, I am happy to help if I can. But yeah, just know that what I'm saying that you probably need to do there is just about as difficult a thing as I think you will find on any track in ACC anywhere. So don't beat yourself up about it if you start struggling with it, but feel free to ask for help if you need it. Otherwise, hope this was some help, and good luck, guys. I'll see you on the track in the server, assuming it doesn't keep booting me for the rest of the week. Otherwise, I will see you this weekend at the race. Have a good night. Take care. See ya.